Well, I feel like the world's going to hell, Eric.
Yeah, I feel like the planet's trying to eat us alive.
It is combusting in on itself. I mean, seriously, we are now at J and K in the major storms.
Yeah.
And, I mean, Harvey and Irma are just eating
monsters.
their
and
way
Jose
through.
is apparently going to be really bad too.
So I think everybody's trying to figure out what they can do if you're not down there.
Yeah.
If you're down there, leave.
Yes,
okay?
If you can, because a lot of people can't, and it's a big pet peeve for me is that people like judge people who didn't get out, and it's like not everyone can.
No, you're exactly right. So if you can leave, and I know a lot have, and they are as we're speaking, but if you can't. Or if you're up here and you're like, how do we help the people who can't?
Yeah. What I've heard is that the Red Cross has taken a lot of shit for mismanagement and they don't spend their money very well. And maybe they deserve some of that. And they are the best group to give to in terms of short-term relief. They are the best equipped to get in there and actually do good things. So
even with all of the drama that's surrounding them, which also I have to think, is there like another charity that's like, putting out bad press? It's like, do charities do that?
I would hope not. I would hope the people who work for charities might. Anyway, give to the Red Cross if you are interested in short-term relief. And then the other advice that I've heard a lot is that you find local charities for long-term kind of stuff. So
local at the place.
Yeah. So after Harvey, I talked to a lot of people who are giving to the Houston Food Bank. Of course, this is a reflection of who I am. I gave money to Hurricane Harvey relief, and then I turned around and gave twice as much money to the SPCA of Houston to save the dogs and cats, because that's whatever. I mean, look, they all need money,
But everybody there is something that's dear to your heart, something that hits you that if it were yours, it would concern you. And so whatever that is, whether it is senior citizens, whether it is those with disabilities, whether it is the homeless, whether it is animals, pets, children, there are charities in those places down, of course, the Panhandle and that sort of thing. And then also up in the Gulf Coast, the Harvey, everybody who is...
And everybody needs help.
And
even
all of them,
puppies.
right. Everybody needs help and all the charities there. So as you said, short term, quick American Red Cross, because they're putting boots on the ground. But long term, find the charities that are local down where they're having really, really major issues and help them. And so we're, all of our thoughts and prayers and whatever else that one does.
Yeah, if we have any listeners if there's anyone in Florida right now, anybody down there, anybody who knows anybody down there, we're thinking about you.
When the chaos of popular culture makes your brain hurt, you really need relief in the form of a transfusion of analysis and humor. It's time for a Poperation. Join hosts Eric and Stacey as they dissect popular culture one bloody organ at a time. It's just what the doctor ordered.
Stacey?
I am Eric.
And this is Poperation, where we dissect pop culture one bloody organ at a time. Today, we're dissecting funny boys, and that sounds worse than it is.
Well, it sounds like gay men to me when you say funny boys, but we're
That's
saying
not really
that.
What I meant.
Yeah, we're saying that because we wanted to talk about stand-up comedians, and there are too many of them.
Oh my gosh, have you been on Netflix?
Yes.
Holy crap.
So here's what I do on airplanes. Netflix now has this thing where you can download material.
Yes.
So you don't have to be on Wi-Fi because, even on a plane before, even if you got on the Wi-Fi, they wouldn't let you stream video because it took up too much room. So now on Netflix, on my iPad, I can download something to watch. And what I've discovered is that stand-up is the best thing to watch on a plane. Because recently I was watching my latest favorite binge, Ozark, which is a great show. Jason Bateman, Laura Linney, very dramatic, but also very suspenseful and sometimes very funny.
You did a blog about that.
I did.
Yeah, so
I did.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, Jason Bateman's having this lovely scene with his daughter, cut to a pregnant, topless stripper. And I'm sitting on an airplane next to some woman.
NSFA. That
not
would be
safe for airplanes. Not hashtag NSFA. So I recently, then I kind of realized, I can watch filthy stand-up if I want to. But usually, unless someone is turning their microphone into a dick so they can make a fellatio joke, most of the time, stand-up is pretty innocuous to just see a visual of in the person next to you, and I can really enjoy myself watching that. So I watch a lot of stand-up on airplanes.
I think that's brilliant also because if something happens, if somebody needs to say something to you, you pause it. It's a joke. It's not the middle of a plot line.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I like it because I commute back and forth to work. I can't commit to a whole hour. My commute's not that long, thank you God. But I can do it in little bits and pieces. So it's perfect for that. So on Netflix, it'll say trendy things. And then the next row will be, because you watch this, here's some dramas. Because you watch this, here's some comedies. Stand-up comedy has its own row.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's so much of it.
So, because there's so much stand-up comedy, we decided, because we also like a lot of women who do stand-up.
Correct.
Now, there's a whole lot that's been said and written and, for a lot of good reasons, that stand-up is kind of a man's world and that women have a hard time breaking through. But the two of us in particular, we just like a lot of female comics. So splitting it down the road by gender seemed to make sense for us.
And I would say that this is just part one because we're only going to talk about a few male comedians.
Oh, we reserve the right to come back to this topic because
there's so much out there.
But it's interesting. Stand-up is a very it's its own little art form, right? And the two of us have been encouraged by a lot of people in our lives to do stand-up. So you're sitting at a party or you're sitting just with somebody and you're having a conversation and you make a comment that makes them laugh. That's fine, and they think that's charming. If you make another comment that makes them laugh, suddenly you're a funny person, and you should be doing stand-up. And I will, and this is what Eric's getting to. No. No. And I've actually considered it. Like there are times I think that when we've been on stage before, we met as actors in a community kind of setting, but we took it pretty seriously. We wanted to do good work, and we have some training in this. I think the reason we resist is that we know how hard it is. It's not just a matter of being funny and then just grabbing a microphone and standing up in front of a bunch of people and just being funny. The amount of work that goes into developing really good stand-up and the writing of it, and it's not a spontaneous thing. It's something that's just worked.
I also think it's a different mindset. I think that there is, when I go on stage, it's memorized and rehearsed, and the audience is there to watch, not participate.
Yep.
I like doing comedy plays because you do get a very instant gratification if you get it right. They do laugh. Rarely do you get heckled.
True.
Whereas stand-up is a whole nother game because it's not necessarily a character. There are some stand-up comedians who have in the past been characters. I put that in quote. But it's
Stephen
not.
Wright was a character, kind of the
Correct.
deadpan,
and funny. But yes. But it's not. Andrew Dice Clay also claimed that was a character.
I believe that.
And I do too. But he made some poor choices. But anyway, my point being that it's a different mindset. You are going out there as yourself. And there is an audience participation part of it.
Yeah.
And there is more chance of getting heckled. I'm not good on my feet. So sometimes you have to say things that you haven't rehearsed, you haven't prepared.
Yeah.
That's not my thing. It's also, but you're when I'm playing a character on stage, it's not Stacey. It's whatever the character is.
Sure.
So I'm not as vulnerable. Stand-up comedy is very, very vulnerable.
Very. Yeah.
And
now, I'll push back on you a little bit because I will say, given all of that, I agree with everything you just said, and I think you'd be very good at it if you decided that's what you wanted to do. My point is, it's not just some casual choice. Oh, I think I'll just do a little bit of stand-up this weekend. No. No. It is hard work. And if you are driven to do that, then you put the work into it. And I think we could, and you do memorize your set. You know what joke comes next. The words might not come out exactly the same because it's you and a microphone, so no one's depending on you to do it exactly the same way. But, you know what your jokes are kind of in order, and you know what comes after next. You know what your transition are. So it's like it's memorizing a really long monologue, at least in bullet form. But it's just hard work. It's just really hard work. And so when people just toss off this thing very casually, oh, you should do stand-up, you have to be driven to want to do that.
That's what I'm saying. I think there has to be that mindset that you're driven to do that particular thing. Because it is such a different skill than going up there and performing and being a good actor. It's a different skill.
And yet people do treat stand-up comedians as though, oh, this is a springboard for you to get on a sitcom or you to be a movie star.
And for some it is, but it's not for everybody.
But it's not for everybody. Some people just love stand-up. And they'll never stop doing it. Even if they do act on a TV show or get in a movie, they'll always go back on the road and do stand-up to sharpen those skills.
Well, you look at Don Rickles. You look at Bob Newhart. Till his death, Don was still working.
Yep.
And Bob is still working. There is an adrenaline rush that I think it's possible that also you get addicted to.
Yep.
Again, I'm not jumping out of a plane anytime soon either. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
and it would probably feel much the same.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
But that's so here I will say I have so much respect for these people because it is ballsy what they're doing. Mm-hmm. It's also, as you said, a lot of hard work. And the ones that we're talking about have honed their skills. And of course, when you start out in stand-up, it's always in a crap. It's always in a dive bar or bowling alley or whatever.
Yep.
And so they all have awful stories of when they were up and coming and the heckling. And that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
And I just don't, I don't care. My sensibilities are just offended.
You're such a delicate flower,
I am a hothouse flower.
So we're going to start off by talking about one of my favorite stand-up comics, and it's funny when I was asked just to focus on men, I was like, oh, and then two came to mind like immediately, and one of them was Louis C.K.
You've talked about him a lot over the years. I do know that this is one of your favorites.
So I love Louis C.K. Now, funny story. Our friend Faye, I was visiting her, and we couldn't decide what to watch. And so she actually had a really great idea. She's like, let's just put on some stand-up because that's always fun. So I said, oh, Louis C.K., I love him. Have you heard of him? And she had not. So we put on a Louis C.K. special.
This was years ago.
Years ago. And it started with a 10-minute bit by him that was in defense of the word faggot, about how he liked saying faggot. And he was going to say faggot. And he's a straight white man, and Faye and I are both gay. And I had never heard this particular bit before. And I can't say that I loved it. I can't say it's my favorite thing that he ever did. Faye.
How'd that go over?
Not well. Faye said, we are turning this off. And she was in such a foul mood after that. And I was like, how can you like this person? Like, I'd never heard this routine before. He's usually very funny. Interestingly, though, Louis C.K. had a sitcom called Louis.
Yes.
2 years after that, there was a scene where Louis C.K. was playing cards with all of his buddies, and one of the men around the table, and again, Louis C.K. was in this, played a stand-up comedian in his own TV show, but also wrote most of the show. And in this scene, he wrote a scene where he and a bunch of guys, including a gay man, were sitting around playing poker, and the topic was the word faggot. And this gay man explained to him why it's just not funny in a lot of ways. You know, it's like, I get that, you know, you say I should have, you know, more of a sense of humor, and I do, and I'm open to this, but, you know, here's how I hear that word, and here's where it takes me to. And this is me as a bullied kid. And in the scene, Louis C.K. gets really defensive around his use of the word faggot, and never really says he's sorry. He just kind of says, well, okay. But keep in mind, he wrote the scene, and he wrote the dialogue for the gay character to say as well. In a way, it was an apology, and it was almost more of an honest apology.
Well, it's almost like you feel like somebody said something to him after he did that thing that you and Faye watched, and said, by the way. And I think that this was a way for him to, and that's what comedians do, though, is that so they put out whatever they do, their comedy. Then there is reaction to it, and that just becomes part of their comedy the next time.
Exactly. Exactly.
And which is brilliant. It's like you're never without material because something's always happening to you.
But I will tell you, if you have delicate sensibilities, maybe Louis C.K. isn't your guy.
No.
Because I was just watching his brand new special called 2017.
Yeah.
And he gets on stage and the audience is roaring and everything's great. And he's like, so abortion. Those are the first two words out of his mouth are so abortion. And basically he says, you know, his punchline through this whole thing that he just milks and milks and milks, like a really great comic can milk a joke for a really long time. And it's still funny, is that, you know, and I don't know that I should even go there on this particular show, but like if you want to hear a very graphic pro and con, and he does the pro and the con about abortion, and it's hilarious, but like he's kind of in this clueless straight guy persona. He's never going to have to get an abortion.
Right.
So, you know, he comes out on the pro-choice side of things, but basically he's saying if you believe that abortion is killing a baby, then of course you're on this other, and he said, you know, he makes fun of people who make fun of people who protest at abortion clinics. Like, they're so annoying. It's like, okay, they think you're killing a baby. What are they supposed to do? You know, and he sees, but he says, but I think that women should be able to have abortions. And here's why, you know.
Right. So it's a begrudging. And again, this is what I'm talking about of why I wouldn't. This isn't, he's putting himself out there.
Really out there.
That's who he is. That's where he is. And of course, he can only be a straight white guy. That's who he is.
Yep.
And again, we talk about the reactions. You put it out there, people are going to react, especially in this day and age with all the social media and whatnot. Yeah. But that's gutsy and that's ballsy, but it is honest. And whatever you want to say.
And they say you have to take risks if you're going to be a comic. You cannot play it safe. You absolutely cannot do it. The other two things I have to say about Louis C.K. before we take a break is, one, this probably his most famous bit is that he was on the Conan O'Brien show. And this has gone viral a number of times. And you can tell that Conan's just there to prop him up as he's doing a pretty well-rehearsed stand-up bit. But it is brilliant. And it's called Everything is Amazing and No One is Happy. And it's all about how people today are just so entitled for the littlest thing. And, you know, especially when they're traveling on airplanes, they get so grumpy. And he starts screaming at Conan, "You are sitting in a chair in the sky." You should be so amazed that this is even happening. It's like, you realize this trip used to take a generation and you're doing it in 5 hours. Like, that should be like, oh my God.
That's true.
And it's just all about how we just take stuff for granted. And I think that really hit a nerve with people. The other thing that he does, he has a little skit called Being White. And he's basically, it's his take on white privilege. And as a diversity person, someone who does that in my day job, I love this bit because it is so funny. But he's basically just saying, you know, we take so much for granted. And he says, I'm not saying that white people are better. I'm saying that being white is clearly better, you know, in terms of what you have to, and he talks about how you can prove it through time travel, because I could go to any time in the world and I'd be just fine. And it's very funny.
There is a TV show. I have two things I want to say. There's this TV show. I think it's called Timeless or whatever, and it just got renewed.
Yep.
And it's
canceled and then uncanceled, right?
Correct. And it's 3 adventures. I'm not going to give you the plot. You want to watch it, you can watch it. But they have to travel in time to fix stuff. Okay. One of the people is black. And so sometimes when they go back, he's like, I don't really want to go back there, because the 40s, not so great for me.
Yeah.
And you know, 1865, not the best time for someone of my melatonin. But there's this acknowledgement that in the past in shows, they wouldn't necessarily even acknowledge it. They'd ignore it and whatever. The other thing I want to say is, you're talking about being white. Chris Rock, who is another brilliant comedian, which... And we're not going to go into much to him. He's one of my favorites, but he
deserves it, though. He's amazing.
And again, it could go into part 2.
Yeah.
I have somebody who's like him coming up. But anyway, he has this bit exactly like that. He says, I am rich. I'm so rich. And life is good, whatever. He said, but I want to ask any white person in this room, talking to this audience, this huge audience of people.
Pretty diverse crowd usually for Chris.
Would any white guy here trade to be me? And he said, no, not one of you would. Even though I'm as rich as I am, I know the people I know, I do the stuff, I go the places I go. No white man is going to want to trade places with me. And I think that is the same thing that Louis is saying, but it's from these two different people putting it out there, being honest. And they come to the same conclusion. Yeah.
So when it comes to why I love Louis C.K., he makes me laugh. I mean, on just a very simple level, when I watch him, I typically, not when he's going off about why faggot's such a great word. I didn't laugh at that very much.
Not that day.
Not that day. Most of the time, Louis C.K. makes me laugh a lot. And yet he goes to play, he talks about important stuff. And I think, again, stand-up, it's kind of like what we talk about pop culture, that not everyone takes it very seriously. We think it's really important. Stand-up sometimes is really easy to just kind of say, stand-up comedy. It's so, and you have some stand-up comedians that all they do is make fun of celebrities. This is for the other show, but Joan Rivers was always a favorite of mine. All she ever did was, most of the time was kind of pick on figures in pop culture that we're all aware of and make fun of them.
The last half of her, yes. The first, if you watch in the early Carson ones, it was kind of Phyllis Stiller-esque. She was talking about her family, about her husband, and what she did like that. But no, later on, once she started meeting all these famous people.
Then she had some fodder. But the stand-up comics that I tend to like more, they're talking about like important issues of the day, things that shouldn't be funny, and yet they find the humor in there, and it's twice as funny for me. So when Louis C.K. goes off about racism or entitlement or abortion even, and I'm thinking this should not be and we just had a conversation about this a couple weeks ago. You wouldn't think this would be this pretty divisive topic, and tears are rolling down my face. I'm just laughing.
Well, I put stand-ups that I like in I guess basically two categories. There are the ones that are really, really smart and clever, and they're taking current events and major topics and incorporating them. And then there are those that are more of the observational, and it's the smaller. It's not the big topics. They're just talking about these smaller things. Sometimes they can be connected and have analogies or metaphors or whatever, but normally they're funny because the experience or whatever it is that they're talking about is universal, but it's not necessarily this big controversial kind of thing. So I have the two that I'm going to talk about later. One is one side and one is the other side, because I feel like sometimes I'm not in the mood. Don't make me think. I've told you this. You just got to entertain me. If you are under the word entertainment, you just got to entertain me. Sometimes I don't want to be taught anything, and I don't even want to get my ire up about anything right now. My placard's right here beside me, but I'm just not taking it up right now. That's not Louis C.K. You're thinking when you're watching and listening to Louis C.K.
Yeah, and we've had this conversation before. I feel like he invites you to think. He doesn't force you to think. But you do, when you listen to him, you're like, well, what's my opinion about that? Because his opinions are so strong and so funny as he puts them out there. But you are invited to think about some of these issues yourself. And again, you don't have to, but, to me, that's okay to kind of have that invitation. So we're going to take a break. When we come back, two more stand-up comics in our next segment. We're going to start off with a favorite of Stacey's when we come back.
You're listening to Popperation with Eric and Stacey. Take a deep breath. This may sting a little.
Okay, so we're back.
Welcome back.
I came late to this party of fans for this particular comic.
Okay.
He had been talked about, and he had a TV show, then controversially left that TV show. And everybody's like,
who might it be?
Blah, 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 blah. Everybody talked about Dave Chappelle is fabulous.
Yes.
And it felt overhyped to me.
Okay.
So I didn't really watch him. I didn't watch the show. Here's what happened. Have you been watching CNN's The History of Comedy?
No, and everyone's talking about it, and I want to.
You need to.
Okay.
It is, I think it's wonderful. I was going to say brilliant. That might be too strong a word, but it's really, really good.
Really good.
Okay. So in watching that, I have been exposed to bits by people. Like, I'd also heard a lot about Lenny Bruce. And every comic from Richard Pryor, George Carlin, to anybody who's working now cites Lenny Bruce. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay.
See, and the main thing I know about Lenny Bruce is that there was a biopic and Dustin Hoffman played him, so I figured it must be really serious. And yet he was a comic and hysterically funny.
Well, as I said, this documentary on CNN, The History of Comedy, if it's fascinating, and I totally suggest anybody tune into that, because every episode is just so compelling. So Lenny Bruce is really, really amazing. And part of what he did is he made people think. For the first time, comedians weren't just that person who came up and told jokes. Henny Youngman kind of, take my wife, please. And so Lenny was cutting edge, and he was very verbose, and he was really good with words. George Carlin came right after him, and I don't really mean to go down this rabbit hole. My point is that one reason these comedians cite him is because he was doing more than just making people laugh. He was making people think.
Yeah.
What I've discovered through this thing is they showed some bits of Dave Chappelle, and I was blown away. And I understood at that moment, now, Ken, some of this comes to maybe I wasn't at the right time in my life to appreciate Dave Chappelle.
That's always a possibility.
Now I am. So I watched. He has a couple of new shows on Netflix. The man is amazing.
Oh, he's a genius.
He is a genius. I would have to go that far. And what is it's just so impressive, because again, it comes to, so all this stuff happened to him, and then he just brings it into his show, which the good ones do.
Yeah.
But one thing for this one show, he said at the beginning, he brought up O.J. Simpson.
Yeah.
And he said, I met O.J. Simpson 4 times.
Okay.
And he said, I'm going to tell you about each of those times. By the end of this show, you will know all of them.
Okay.
And so, he'd go down a little road, and then he'd say, so the first time I met O.J. Simpson, and he went through, and they were hysterical. But he talked about Bill Cosby. He talked about the bad stuff that happened to him. And yet, and his audience, you talk about diverse. His audience was all the colors of the rainbow.
Yeah.
But he's not, he doesn't limit himself, I didn't feel, to the sensibilities of the people in the audience. He wasn't worried about, I don't say this because the white people are going to be upset, or the Indian people might be upset, or the black people might be upset. Although he even made a joke. He said, there are a lot of black people who don't like me anymore. Just the honesty. And that was the honesty, the really good way with words, and the really smartness of his set blew me out of the water.
Yeah.
Absolutely fell in love with him. So he is now like one of my top forever.
Yeah, no, he's always been, very insightful. I don't even want to use that word because it makes it sound like it's some kind of academic lecture. It's not. It's hysterically funny comedy.
It's only insightful in that if you aren't, in that if this is a completely different kind of perspective for you, you're then, that, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But he is living a life of the African-American male.
Yeah. Again, in comedy, you are who you are, and you bring all that with you, and if you try to leave any of it at the door, it rings false. And it's kind of what I'm reminded of is what you said at the opening of the show, is that it's a very vulnerable place to be.
Oh my gosh.
Stand-up. Because it's just you and a microphone. It is the simplest form of entertainment. I mean, it's the closest we have today to where they said theater started, which is telling stories around the campfire.
But there's no buffer.
No.
Okay. There is, a lot of times, especially in a bowling alley, there is nothing between you and the audience. And that, I mean that physically, but there's also, they're so vulnerable. It's psychologically.
Yeah.
There's nothing.
Usually no lighting, no set, no anything that gives you the trappings of artifice. It's just you with a microphone telling your story, and it better be authentic and transparent and vulnerable and real, or people will catch on. And you're right. Sometimes you get the Stephen Wrights who kind of hide behind this character, this kind of wackadoo persona that they put out there. And there are some really smart and funny people who do that. I notice they're not my favorites.
But I also notice right now, that's not who you're seeing on the lineup on Netflix's stand-ups.
No.
It's people talking about their life as it is.
Yep.
And it's not always pretty, but they're putting that funny, that weird, quirky, because I think you have to have a weird mindset.
Yep.
There has to be enough of an observer in you.
Oh, yeah.
For you to step back from life and whatever you're in the middle of and look at it and say, oh my gosh, if I weren't in the middle of it, that's hysterical. And so, so what you do is you live through whatever that is, and then you're able to go, okay, it wasn't fun at the time, and that's kind of what this show with Dave Chappelle was talking, because he came on stage and he said, yeah, it's been a long time. It's been 10 years since I've done this. Mm-hmm. But he was amazing. And of course, now there's a maturity to it as well. And that experience just adds more. I think there's one where comedians, in my mind, a lot of times get better with age because they have more experience to draw upon, but they also have more experience to then put things in perspective.
Yeah, the great thing about stand-up is that because you are yourself, you don't have to try to conform to be somebody else. When you look at women who are popular on the stand-up circuit, they're not always the size zero, kind of. They're not those kinds of inhibition limitations.
Not all of them are going to get a sitcom
put on you. Yeah. But you're yourself, and so that's what you have to draw on. And so if you're afraid to draw on that, there's not much for you to work with. But if you're not afraid to draw on that, you have a whole, your whole self you can just bring right out
and
there.
As I said, I'm late to the party. I get that there, so many people have said Dave Chappelle they're great. He threw a shout out he said, yeah, I've been gone all this time. And he said, and Key and Peele were doing my show. And if you think about it, they did. They picked up the baton when he left, and their show was very much similar to what he was touching on.
Sure.
And I mean, but he called it out. He put it out there. It's like, if I'm going to go ahead and do it myself so that you can't do it, kind of thing. You can't pull me on that one because I'm going to put it out there first.
Yeah.
But as I said, I know there are a ton of fans of his out there who are saying, this is a duh, Stacey, and this is not cutting edge. I don't care. Shut up. I just found him and I love him.
Part of being a 46-year-old observer of pop culture is that I'm rarely cutting edge anymore. I mean, sometimes I feel like, okay, we do a podcast on pop culture, and the stuff that I really like a lot of the stuff from the 80s and the 90s when I was that was cutting edge at the time. But the music I listen, and it comes from stand-up too. It's like, I think, but a lot of times you're right. Comics do get better with age. A lot of times they hone those skills. They get even sharper at what they're doing. And I think, I'm probably not going to find the observations of a 25-year-old as funny as the observations of a 50-year-old. Because that's not where I am in my life either. Right. Not to say that 25-year-olds can't be funny, but it's just, when you are, in your 40s, you tend to you seek out people who are just going to stand there with a microphone and tell you, here's how I see the world. That might not be as interesting to me. Whereas, people like Don Rickles, Joan Rivers, they had fans much younger than they were when they were still performing. They were considered, a lot of them, at the height of their career right before they died, because it's got funnier and funnier and funnier.
Well, I think I will say that Don, I think, probably was just more of the legend. Joan was still doing new stuff and whatever. Yeah. But Don, I think, was, he still looked up to as this legendary.
Sure.
He wasn't as sharp when I see him on interview shows, and maybe he mellowed in age. I don't know. I remember back in the day, just go down this little rabbit hole because I adore Don Rickles, is watching him in the 70s on the Tonight Show or whatever, and just laughing so hard because he was the insult comic.
Yeah.
And he would you talk about somebody who's off the cuff, and somebody say something to him, a heckler, he would out heckle you.
Oh, yeah.
And he was brilliant at it. And by the way, he had the microphone, dumbass. I mean, he was going to have the last word. He was wonderful. And he and Bob Newhart, which probably most people know, were really best friends.
Yeah.
But they were also, Bob Newhart, the best times are when Bob Newhart would host the Tonight Show when Johnny was out. Bob Newhart would be the host, and he'd have Don Rickles on as a guest. I would be crying so hard I was laughing. And I was like a kid. I was in elementary, or middle school, junior high, whatever. It's not like I was an adult who hung out with a Rat Pack. I got him. He was funny. They were funny. even then. And again, it was different. It was not what Dave Chappelle is doing. Don't get me wrong, but you're right. That was really, really, really funny to me. And so now I'm at a place where Dave Chappelle really spoke to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the same time, as I said, there are I think that you can have a longevity in stand-up that maybe in other parts of entertainment you can't.
Yeah.
So, but again, that's my thing. One of my faves right now, Dave Chappelle, really into him. And now I get to go back because he has a bunch of stuff that's old that I haven't ever seen. It's all new to me. So yay on me. Who has the last laugh? I do.
There you go. There you go. So the other favorite that I wanted to bring out today is again new to me. He's been around for a while. Now that I can put a face to the name, I see him everywhere. He played Brie Larson's husband in Trainwreck. We had several episodes ago.
Yes.
We talked about how much we love Brie Larson in Trainwreck, and he was her husband in that movie. He had a long-running part on Orange is the New Black. He was like the warden's son who got to kind of be pretend warden for a while. And I saw him the entire time on that show. Thought he was annoying as hell, actually, little fucker. But the performance was great, but it didn't really kind of... I knew his name when he came out with a special on Netflix called Thank God for Jokes. And his name is Mike Birbiglia, which that's tough to fit in a marquee, but his name, Mike Birbiglia. Yeah. Also, just to say, he wrote and directed and starred in a movie called Don't Think Twice about an improv comedy troupe. And a lot of stand-up people also do improv. So improv is another one of those things.
That's what I'm saying, is that there is a mindset of being able to think off the cuff so quickly and so sharply. Yeah. I don't have it, as despite what people may think.
Yeah. So Don't Think Twice is about a bunch of people who do improv, and it's about what happens when one of them gets picked up by an SNL kind of a thing, and the others are just kind of left behind. Right. And it's very touching. Of course, the scenes of them doing comedy are great, and you get the idea that they're all very funny people. Anyway, Mike Birbiglia's stand-up called Thank God for Jokes was one of the more hysterical things I've ever seen in my life.
I laughed so much during that.
And yet he's spending a lot of time like deconstructing comedy, like talking about jokes and what makes them funny. And you'd think that would be dry as a bone, but so incredibly funny.
What I enjoyed, we're talking about how Dave Chappelle just goes out there and says these, and Louis C.K. Go out and say these controversial things. Part of it is the shock value. Like we're going to start this way. So if you're offended by this, you might well want to leave now. Yep. But we're going to go this way, and then I'm going to make it funny. Mike didn't do that, but he starts out. It's like he starts out this mild mannered, and you think, oh, okay, this is this guy. This is this nice guy who's going to do observational humor about his middle class white life, whatever.
Yep.
And I didn't think he wouldn't be funny, but then suddenly he'd then make this offside comment that is really sharp, really current eventsy, and very pointed. And you're like, oh, he has claws.
Yeah.
And that's what I enjoyed about him. It's not quite a dichotomy, but it's a surprise every once in a while.
Yeah. So he starts off this show with a whole kind of back and forth about on-time people versus late people, which is such a throwback to kind of it's a pretty safe topic. You're not really going to offend anyone. Of course, he's an on-time person, which then allows him to be superior to the late people. The funniest line in that whole bit, I think, is when people say fashionably late. He's like, is that like being fashionably racist? And, of course, being late is not as bad as being racist.
Right.
And that's what's funny about it. But it's just kind of this, and then of course 2 people walk in late to his set. So he has a chance to like make fun of them. Later on in the set, he's actually talking to audience members, and one of them feels the need to classify that a cop was a woman cop.
Oh, that was brilliant.
And he does not let that go forever.
No, and it was hysterical. And again, this is that sharp off the cuff crap that I can't do. So this guy wasn't a heckler, but he said, has anybody been arrested was the question.
Yeah.
And this guy said, yeah. And then the guy says, well, tell me about, this. And he says, well, it was a woman cop. Mike he said, well, it actually bothers me when you say that. That's I don't like how you say it like that.
Yeah.
And then he went off on that, and he was able to do this bit. He created this bit that wasn't part of his show, Eric.
Yeah.
But he got a good 5 to 7 minutes.
Oh, yeah. And then came back to it at the very end of the show.
Yes. Yeah.
When he was doing his whole wrap up about
But he also, the late thing. People, because the late thing, something else happened. And he was able to bring that into it again.
Coming back to it, and it starts off. The other thing about him is that this special starts off very G-rated, but then the entire last half an hour, just about, is all about one joke that he told at the expense of filmmaker David O. Russell that included famously the word cunt, and he says cunt over and over and over and over again. And you're like, you're the nice guy from New Jersey who is going off about on-time people versus late people. But it's okay. And he also has this whole riff about how he was invited to be a guest star with the Muppets.
Yes,
and forgot his stool. And the very first thing he said was...
Don't.
All right, I won't spoil it.
Because I think that's a really good... I want everybody to
Okay, so we're not going to spoil that joke.
Don't spoil that joke.
But it was hysterical. The other thing that I saw him do was he had another special on it. Once I got off on Thank God for Jokes, and I thought this is the funniest thing. And I watched it on an airplane and was hysterically laughing on a plane with my headphones on, and everyone around me thinks I'm insane. And you know what? I didn't care. I did not care. I was in comedy nirvana watching this thing. When I got to my hotel, I was on work travel. I looked for something else. And the other special that he does have on Netflix is called My Girlfriend's Boyfriend. And it's about his courtship with his now wife. But it's when she was just his girlfriend. And it was kind of a long-form storytelling kind of thing with little detours into comedic territory. It was stand-up. But like a lot of stand-up that I like, and particularly when we do our next show and we talk about funny girls, I've got a couple of women who do this really, really well, who do kind of this long-form storytelling kind of thing. That it's really the show is it's as much a one-man show about a thing as it is just someone standing up on stage doing wry observational humor and telling a bunch of jokes. Very, very touching because, of course, it's a love story. So at the end, when they decide to make a go of it, you're really like, oh, like I was actually kind of moved after I'd been laughing hysterically for a good hour and a half. He is just very, very sharp. The other thing I would point people to is he did another podcast, Unqualified, Anna Faris's podcast.
Yes.
He was a guest star on her podcast and was a riot on this thing. And she, of course, went on and on and on about why wasn't I in Don't Think Twice? Like, it's such a perfect movie. Why couldn't I have done it? And he was like, I had no idea you wanted to do it. And she was like, are you kidding me? And the two of them together, adorable, very funny. Again, seems like a really nice guy. Seems like he'd be a great next door neighbor. Also so smart and funny.
Well, and that's the thing is I do think, I don't know that you're going to be a successful stand-up if you're stupid.
You can play stupid, but I don't think you can be stupid.
I'm talking about be stupid because, as you said, there's an awful lot of work that goes into, and that's why. So they plan all of their jokes or their bits, and the timing and the words are in the exact right order, and that's what gets me. So that all of that goes into it, and then at the same time, you're able to walk into the audience and totally riff on something that you didn't know was going to exist.
Yeah.
That is able to switch your brain from one to the other is I find it very impressive.
Be there
he was
in
hysterical,
that moment. Yeah.
He was very, very funny, and I had never seen him before until you brought him up. So I thought that was a really good win.
Yeah. Mike Birbiglia. 5 stars for Thank God for Jokes. Check it out on Netflix. We are going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about one more, maybe 2 stand-up comics, and then we're going to do our final diagnosis, and we'll wrap up for this week. So you're listening to Popperation. I'm Eric.
I'm Stacey.
Open wide. It's your prescribed dose of Popperation with Eric and Stacey.
And we are back. This is Popperation. I'm Eric.
I'm Stacey, and we're talking about funny boys, really stand-up comedians who happen to be male.
Yes.
And because at one point we were thinking we'd do a stand-up show, but there's just too many to do. Like, that was just too vague. But also, this is really just funny guys part 1, because there's just no way.
Yeah. Well, this is something we can come back to and come back to and come back to. Stand-up is the simplest form of entertainment there is, but so difficult to do well.
I think it is deceptively simple looking. Because it's really not.
Which is why people at cast parties always say to us, you should do stand-up.
They need to shut up. They need to shut up now. So we've talked about several, and I told you that I kind of divided my favorites into 2 kinds, in that there's the one that is, cutting edge and current events and usually is, an issue driven thing. And then there are those that are more observational, a little bit more quiet. They may not be controversial at all. Mm-hmm. So my next one is just discovered, new to me. And he's kind of like
new to me too.
Mike Birbiglia. He's been around though.
Yeah.
He wrote for Colin O'Brien. Just Colin O'Brien. He wrote for Conan. He wrote for Jimmy Fallon. Lots of comedians feel like he should be more famous than he is. But I just found him by accident.
Well, you know where I found him?
Oh,
little plug. Netflix has a new thing called The Stand-Ups. It's a series. And there's 6 episodes, and each one is like a half an hour, and he is episode 1.
He is. Now, that's where I saw him first, but I thought, I like him, and it's not just because he lives outside of Nashville, which is where I'm from. Uh-huh. But that was that. So, Brad Paisley, you know who he is?
I know that name.
Yeah, you do, because he's a huge country singer.
Okay, yeah.
He also has a stand-up comedy show on Netflix.
I didn't watch it, but I saw that.
Okay, so I did watch it. First of all, I'll tell you, he's funny.
Brad Paisley?
Does he do stand-up? Funny. He doesn't do not really.
He has funny patter in between his songs.
Yes, okay. And he made some funny comments at the beginning, in between.
Yep.
He was like the MC of it. Uh-huh. So I feel like he probably is really funny, but he doesn't. He did not do a show.
But he's charming.
But he's very charming. But he was very clever and funny. But this guy was in that as well, and it's Nate Bargatze is his name. He's a Southern boy. Now I'm gonna differentiate that from a Southern good old boy. Okay, good old boy.
You need to define that for us.
Good old boy. If you ever watched, there was the Kings of Comedy, which was when Steve Harvey and Bernie Mac and Cedric the Entertainer, and forgot the other guy, but they went on tour. They filmed their comedy tour in 2000. Yep. Absolutely hysterical. If you've never seen that movie, that is an hysterical stand-up. Everybody was absolutely wonderful. White guy, Jeff Foxworthy, did the same thing, calling it, was it the Country Comedy Tour? Something like that. But it was the same thing. It was he and Larry the Cable Guy, Ron White, and again, I can never remember number 4 of either one of the teams. Okay. Anyway, Jeff Foxworthy's, most of them are Southern good old boys. Okay. And a good old boy is usually fairly conservative, fairly chauvinistic.
Yeah. And of course, Foxworthy's whole shtick is that whole, if you're a redneck.
Correct. And then you also had Larry the Cable Guy, which is Get Her Done. Mm-hmm. And then the other guy whose name I can't remember's deal was Here's Your Sign.
Okay.
And then Ron White, whom I actually really, really like. He is a good old boy, but I really like him. This guy, Nate, not a good old boy in that he's not sitting, you don't feel like he's sitting around smoking a cigar.
Yeah.
He's just your everyman.
Okay.
Who happens to be from the South. So he does and he's an observer. He's more of that, you're going to hear stories about his life and what has happened to him. Usually not connected to a big issue, hot button topics. Yeah. He's not doing that really.
Yeah.
But he's very funny. But it's this quiet humor. And I will tell you, I'm trying to remember. I think it's the one that did you see the one on stand-ups? Did you see him? Uh-huh. He has a bit about this trip to a serpentarium. And I don't know whether I should tell you what that is, because I think if you watch it, it's much more fun for him to tell you what it is. But it is a place you can go, and it's a place he visited. I remember at the beginning of it, he said, this is a real story. And the way you can find out is you can go onto one of the travel app where people, rate how their trips were.
Yep.
And he said, look this up. this serpentarium and read the comments. Okay. He said, because my story, what happened to me, isn't the only time this has happened. And start with the 1-star ratings. I actually did that after the stand-up was over. After 5 stars, I thought, I'm going to do that. So I go on the app and I look up the 1-star, and sure enough, the story he told, which was hysterical, and it seems like he probably just totally elaborated on it and went crazy, exaggerated. He didn't. Some of the reviews, and he's right, the reviews of this place are hysterical, but it's a serpentarium down in Florida. It's ridiculous. But here it was not a hot button topic. Mm-mm. I didn't necessarily learn anything of value from it, but his way of telling a story and the observations he made and the details he would pull. Yeah. And that's another thing, is that comics pull different details depending on who they are from the different episodes that happen to them. And if they're smart, they pull funny ones. Mm-hmm. They look at the funny things and go, for example, I will say, so the serpentarium has snakes in it. And in one, he's describing how they were going to feed the snakes. And one snake that was really venomous, in order to protect the people who came to watch, they had chicken wire. That was the protection.
Oy.
Between the snakes, venomous snakes, and the children.
Nice.
Was chicken wire. It's hysterical. I mean, you're picturing it.
It's hysterical that as long as you're not there.
Well, no, exactly. And as I said, you read the 1- and 2-star reviews of this place. Yep. It's like this was clearly what they've done it a lot, and they're not, whatever money they're getting from the ticket sales, they're not using it on making it better
or safer.
But as I said, he had a lot of different little observations, and I enjoyed him because. And the reason I picked him to talk about is he's an example of that quiet humor that's still funny. Yeah. And somebody else that I'll put into that, who is a huge name, Jim Gaffigan.
Yeah.
Who I also think is funny. Mm-hmm. I will watch his specials when they come on. Yeah. I will tell you, I can watch them with my kids. I'll be honest with you. That's a plus in certain respects. But he's very, very smart. And the second season of the Jim Gaffigan Show was brilliant. The first season was fine, but it was kind of typical. Yeah. And the second season, they took more charge of the writing, he and his wife, and it had an edge to it. And the second season of the Jim Gaffigan Show was brilliant, and then they decided to stop. It wasn't canceled. They just decided they didn't want to do that anymore. But Jim is very, very smart, and I follow him on Twitter and all that. But again, I appreciate that you don't have to be that controversial, loud comedian or comic to be really, really good and successful.
Well, it's funny. When you say Southern comic to me, the first person that comes to my mind is Leslie Jordan. Not Leslie Jones.
Oh, okay. Not because I was like, we're talking about men. Yeah. But you're talking about, right.
Little Leslie Jordan, who played Beverly Leslie on Will and Grace. Karen Walker's nemesis.
But right? I believe he's been on, I think he was in Designing Women as well.
He was on Designing Women. Also well known for Sordid Lives, the Del Shores play that was made into a very sparsely funded independent movie. But he's hysterical in that too. He had a stand-up special a while back called My Life on the Pink Carpet. And he's clearly a little gay man, little Southern gay man. And he's not, quiet. No. Because he's out there. But, and I'm not from the South, so I don't know how much of that I can really relate to, but I could certainly relate to his stories of being a little young gay boy trying to be butch. I mean, trying his best and just failing miserably. And it's like we were saying before, a lot of this stuff is comedy built on pain, but when you're through with it and you can go back and tell stories about being younger and kind of doing that and just how ridiculous he must have been trying to be this butch little kid.
I think part of what I liked, and as I said, not just because Nate lives outside of Nashville, is from there, but there is something about listening to this. And I do the Redneck Comedy Tour, or whatever it was, it was very, very, very popular. There is a good storytelling kind of thing that the Southern accent lends itself to. Perhaps, yeah. And so, but also Southerners, I mean, that's, I hate making these blanket statements, even though I did come from the South. I hate making the statements that, there is storytelling, but I was brought up on storytelling.
I think it's a part of the culture. I think it's fair to say that stories and the importance of stories is it's important in the South. That's a part of Southern culture.
Maybe it's because we learned to read later. I don't know.
Oh my God.
Of course, that's a joke. I could read a full book by the time I was 15. So
good for you.
There you go, Mrs. King. She was my first grade teacher.
But I mean, he just tells. So one of his little bits that I thought was so funny that I saw recently is him recording his voice into a tape recorder when he was a little boy, and he just sat there and he was learning how to. And mostly he just wanted to figure out how the tape recorder worked. So he kind of mimed hitting the record button and saying this thing into the tape recorder. And he said, and what played back at me was, and when he says the exact same thing again, but it's so feminine, and he was just horrified, and I just sounded just like a little girl. He's so sweet.
He's adorable.
He is adorable. I mean, adorable really is the word for him. And he could be very cutting on things like Will and Grace, but I mean, when he's just being himself and talking about your heart goes out to him. But also, he's just puts himself out there. I mean, it's the same thing. It's a very vulnerable space, but so funny.
I think that sometimes, and we've talked about British people. How their accent lends itself to villainy. And I think that the Southern accent, it does unfortunately lend itself to people perceive you as being dumber. But I think also there is, designing women, case in point, and that you can do these long speeches and it's just lovely to listen to.
Yeah.
But again, my thing about Nate, and it sounds like Leslie, whom I have not seen this stand up, is there is this lyrical quality to it's not. Again, don't have to be controversial necessarily, but you have to be smart. I still think you have to be smart because you've got to observe the right things and then be able to talk about your observations of those things in a way that is amusing, but also nice to just hear. Yeah. And I think that to me, when I was listening to Nate, when I was watching Nate, I felt very comfortable because I'm like, home.
Okay.
That's how I felt.
Fair.
Is that, and again, you talked about, it's when you see people that are like you, or hear people that you can connect to because you respect and you respond to them because there is something in common. Going back to Mike Birbiglia, he has a bit about a hymn at church. And I know,
and I grew up Catholic, so that one totally grabbed me.
But here's my thing. So that's my whole point on this. So I'm listening to it, and with my husband Frank, who also grew up Catholic. And the moment Mike said something about we have this hymn, and he started singing it, Frank sang along.
Yeah,
Frank knew it. And
every Catholic knows it. Every Catholic.
I don't know. I didn't grow up Catholic, so I didn't know it. So but it was like, and then when he told the rest of it, which is about something that his brother did a kind of weird Al Yankovic thing.
Lyrics thing, yeah.
It was hysterical, but it was more hysterical to Frank,
way more
than it was to me.
Because if you grew up in the Catholic Church, you have heard that refrain. It's not even a hymn; it's a part of the Mass. So it happens every single week. You sing that piece with that melody. So every
Which also, by the way, going back for a minute, that bit does also connect to being late and on time.
Yes.
So he was very, very clever. But my point on this being that, so there was that connection for you and Frank because you grew up, white and Catholic.
Yep.
For me, with Nate Bargatze, I totally got it. Yeah. Under his accent felt like home. It felt like, every reunion I've ever gone to.
Smelled like mom's cooking.
And so he would tell these little stories about it, and then we do blah, blah. I'm like, yeah. Yep. And so I think that helps as well, which is one reason why there's so many. Yeah. Is that there's so many different people who are relating to so many different things. And when I was looking at it, oh my gosh, I was looking at all the diversity. Holy cow.
Yeah.
You can find anything you want.
Well, and that's it. You know, like Aziz Ansari, or the guy whose name escapes me, who is the star of The Big Sick, who was so great.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard to be, and Aziz Ansari had a whole thing in Master of None about being an Indian American actor and always being asked to do the accent.
Right.
You know, and how he doesn't want to do the accent. Like, this is not his life. He's an American, but he can be absolutely himself in stand-up, and he doesn't have to wait for someone to write the right script and have it approved by a network and finally get it on. You know, if he's good, he can just put himself out there like every other stand-up comedian. If he can get on that stage and make people laugh, then that's what you have to do, and you get to write your own stuff.
And therein lies some of the freedom of being a stand-up, is that you are not. If you're like me, where you've got to have a script. And you've got to have a director. You've got to have a place to put it on.
But if you're a type that's hard to cast, you don't need to worry about that as much in stand-up.
Right. But in stand-up, you're your own person.
So you're not
producer.
You're not too, you're not too heavy. You're not too this. You're not too that. You're not too Indian. It's just you are who you are. It's interesting to me that when you say all that stuff about how Nate kind of takes you back home, I feel a little sad because all of a sudden I realize it's like, other than Leslie Jordan, I can't think of too many gay comics, gay men, who really make me laugh.
No.
Most of the comics that the gay male community follows are really funny women, which will be another show for another time. I'll get into my whole gay identity piece talking about the Kathy Griffins and Margaret shows and Joan Riverses and all of those folks who gay men flock to.
Right.
We don't and I don't know why. I mean, it's just maybe just kind of putting that out in the universe.
I don't know if they're out there.
They are. I mean, there are a lot of gay comics. Brian Salfi's one who does that Throwing Shade podcast. And I actually looked online. I saw something Out Magazine's like, here are the top 10 gay comics who will make you laugh, and I looked through them, and either I'd never heard of them or the one or two that I have heard of, whose names I won't mention here because it's not nice. I was like, not for me.
Okay.
I don't know. There's just and I would think that if someone was really and again, Leslie Jordan, adorable, makes me howl, love him, can't think of too many others. And I don't know what that is. I think I might need to give myself some homework and see if I can find some gay comics because they're telling my story.
Right.
Like I should really relate to that.
And maybe that's part of the final diagnosis for me is that, so what this is, we talk about you getting through, bad parts of your life and then coming out at the other end, being able to look at the funny bits of what you just went through, and that comedians tend to be able to do that. Or even if it's just something simple that you went on this road trip and here are some silly things that happen kind of thing, observing the right things to get some kind of humor. But I do think that your audience has to be able to relate to you.
Yeah.
But you're not necessarily going to, I think that Louis C.K. and Dave Chappelle are both very good at getting a huge wide range of an audience.
Yeah.
But most of the time, your audience is going to be a little more limited than that.
Yeah.
Because they're going to be people who relate to you more specifically. And maybe it's if you are just the quiet observational, maybe, I don't know, Jim Gaffigan's huge. So I don't know I was going to try to make a big different, but I'm not sure. My point is, in this episode, is just to say, if you already know Dave Chappelle, he's got a new thing out and it's funny. If you haven't, you need to discover him because he's brilliant and hysterical. And everything that everybody's ever said to me about him, that I kept going, you're, overkill. They're right. And then, but also I wanted to bring the attention Nate Bargatze, because I think he's very charming.
Yes, very, very charming guy. And for me, Louis C.K. is I would qualify this. Again, if you have delicate sensibilities and you're easily offended, I would stay away, quite honestly, from Louis C.K., although watch his sitcom. Because it's a very kind of thoughtful side of him that you usually don't see on stage. He's pretty brusque on stage. Yes. And he also had a great episode about dating a woman who carried a little bit of extra weight. And how she at the end said, I don't want to be pretty for a fat girl. That's not what I'm looking for. Right. That's what you see me as. You think you're doing me some big favor? Well, fuck off. And it was a great, and again, he's a jerk on the show, but he also wrote those lines to be said back to his face. And it just kind of shows that he's got this amazing kind of range of feeling, but his stand-up is pretty strong. It's out there. I would tell anyone to go watch Mike Birbiglia.
Oh, he's
I just
very
think
funny.
I don't know of anyone that in my life who wouldn't enjoy his stuff. And then just keep an eye on him in terms of just movie roles and other stuff going on, because I think he's going to be seen a lot more.
But I think that, we were talking about why, on an airplane, on a commute, but check out Netflix's and anywhere that YouTube where you can see some of these guys.
You can see a lot of stand-up on these new
streaming channels. There's so much out there, and there's some really good talent that just hasn't been discovered, in the big time yet. But as I said, it's one of those, it takes you out of whatever space you are and puts you in another, the good ones put you in another place that makes you smile or laugh for a little bit.
So my final diagnosis is really just a ton of respect for people who do this. Do not tell the next funny person who makes you laugh at a cocktail party that they should just grab a microphone and do stand-up, because anyone who knows they're talking about knows that is a hell of a lot of work. So congrats to the people who do it. Thank you to those who make us laugh. We are going to come back to this topic more than once.
Oh, yeah. There's too many out there.
Yeah, because there's too much to talk about. But anyway, this is Popperation. My name is Eric.
I'm Stacey.
And we are available on Apple Podcasts and Google Play and Stitcher and iHeartRadio. And you know what? Send us a review. If you're listening, and I'm just going to put a little plug for this. If you're listening and you like what we do, a good review, particularly on Apple or on iTunes, brings other people to us. It helps us show up in their search results, and it just helps us expand our audience. So we would certainly appreciate that. Until next week, we'll see you later.
You've been listening to Popperation with Eric and Stacey. Check out our website at popperationroom.com for links to our blog and other extras. Don't forget to subscribe to Popperation via iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube, and other podcast locations. You can also follow at Popperation Room on Facebook and Twitter. Music provided by purpleplanet.com.